or she dispensed various pieces of advice. And she was thinking one day, maybe someday I'll give a commencement address for a high school or college. And what would I say if I did? And she's watching someone on a nearby roof sunbathing, and she goes, "Boy, I hope she wears sunscreen." And it touched off this whole meandering that she did. And in 1997, she wrote an essay called "Advice Like Youth Probably Is Just Wasted on the Young," and it appeared in June 1997 in the Chicago Tribune. And after that, it ended up going viral, and people picked it up, redid it various ways. Baz Luhrmann, he did this song, and it was a number one song for a number of years. And then back in 2007, it actually came back again. And I came about it when the pastor group was talking about it, and the life advice in there. And so I played it for Alex way back when, and we had an interesting conversation that followed from that whole experience. I mean, it is very sound advice in many ways. It kind of grounds you into the reality that you need to face in all these things. So without, getting too much involved, it's a special day, and it's always special when we can share these days with people. And it's a special day for Kate because she gets to graduate from school and move on to either more school or the workforce. And if I tell you, by the look on her face, she's probably like, "I want to get out of this and never come back." I can sympathize. I've always been that way. It's just like school isn't my thing. Freedom until you have to work, and then it's a whole other thing. Many of us have gone through similar things. We had Joe's graduation last year. We have a sixth grade graduation coming up in a few weeks. I mean, it's still pretty cool. But you go on to middle school, and that ushers in a whole nother part of your life. We've had weddings, and we've had all this stuff. We have people who have retired, and we've had people nearing retirement. So we have a pretty wide swath of different lives and different levels of where we are in life. When you were young, you tended to look at life like it was never ending. I know I did. I always thought there'd be time for everything, and the time to do all you want, make plans whenever you want to, and it never seemed to be any real hurry for these things. And after several decades, you look back at the accomplishments that you have made, and you're proud of the ones that you were able to be a part of, and the ones that that directly involved you, and the things that you've done. But you always wish, and it's universal for everybody, you always wish you could have done more. I mean, the only time I've ever heard that contrary was a friend who had just retired, and we were driving to another friend's house, and he said, "I don't regret anything about my past life." And I go, "You're probably the first person I've ever heard you say that." And it's just everybody I talk to has some regret somewhere in their lives. And there's always more we wish we could have done with the lives that we had. Now, years ago, if you were getting letters back and forth, and that was before email, before even telephone, before all that fun stuff, you would get letters from people. Letters was the main thing that you would get between people, and you'd have to work really hard to write and communicate and all that. And I actually remember seeing this years ago. You'd get a letter from somebody, and typically instead of PS, postscript at the end, and then you have a signature, it'd either have that or it'd have another set of letters at the end of it. It'd be D and V, DV. And if you understand what that means, if you're a former Catholic, you definitely know what that means. It carried the entire weight of whatever was in that letter, DV. It stood for Deo Volente, Deo Volente, D-E-O Volente. And it meant, if it is the Lord's will. And the entire weight of that letter would be carried on that phrase alone, Deo Volente. And occasionally you actually still see it once in a while used, but it's not nearly as common as it used to be. Especially it was very common back in the 1700s, the 1800s. And there were still people that used it well into the 20th century. And I don't know if anyone does at all use it today, but it carried so much weight for those people that did use it. One of the most interesting passages in the Bible is actually James 4 and verse 13. This is where that phrase originated from. It's a warning, but it's also a correction that gives you hope. James 4 and verse 13. And the lead in my Bible says boasting about tomorrow. James 4 and verse 13. Now listen, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go to this or that city and spend a year there and carry on business and make money. Why, you don't even know what will happen tomorrow. What is your life? You are a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes. He's quoting directly from Ecclesiastes. Instead, you ought to say, if it is the Lord's will, we will live and do this and that. As it is, your boasting is arrogant schemes, and such boasting is evil. It is evil because you left something important out. You left the power of God out of it. Now, James at his time was warning the rich rulers in his church to take care about their boasting and to be concerned about their pursuits in life. He was trying to make sure that they had the right focus in all these times and all these plans that they had. And the right focus was the will of the Lord, making sure that that took priority over everything in their lives. Now, it was actually kind of funny because the Jews and Muslims argue about that phrase because they both use that a lot. Even today, those cultures will use "if God wills" as one of their rallying cries. And they argue because the Muslims will say, well, we had it first. And the Jews say, well, no, we had it first. But you go back in history, guess where they probably got it from? Abraham, because they both stem from Abraham. And you follow Abraham's life, it was very much what he did was the Lord's will. So at least, then in their cultures, it's common. Deo volente, though, throughout time, if the Lord wills, was the rallying cry for the first generation Christians because it became paramount that everything was guided by Christ. For them, a lot of it was understanding that he would return, and to them, they expected it in his lifetime. But throughout the centuries, it remained the same. Deo volente, if God wills. They put it as paramount in their lives. They put it when they wanted to put themselves aside. They use that phrase too. And a lot of times in Christianity, there's times you have to put yourself aside and say, if God wills, whatever he chooses to do, he's going to do it, and I have to go with it. The term Deo volente actually surfaced many times, and it's interesting that PBS had a series out, I want to say 20 years ago, called Letters from the Front. And I used to watch it a lot. And it was basically them reading letters from war times that were written back and forth by people. And occasionally you'd find that Deo volente, or if the Lord wills theme in these letters. And probably the most recent ones that they talked about were from the Civil War. And there was one letter that was particularly heart-wrenching, is when a father was writing to his son who was on the front and telling him that his wife had died in childbirth. And he spent a good part of the letter talking about, we don't understand why God allowed this, but we have to trust it was his will that this took place. And it was very heart-wrenching to hear this letter. So it remained fairly common for many years to hear this, if God wills, if God will provide, if God does all these things. What happened though? You don't hear it as much anymore. It changed. It changed around the 1960s and the 1970s because it went from God's will for the majority of people, from the religious centers in society, to my will, what I want. My will comes first. We saw this take hideous form by the 1970s, and in the culture that we have today, my will over everybody else has caused a lot of problems for this world that we have today. Abortions, divorce, all these things are a result of my will over anyone else's, and more importantly, over God. You can go to the phrase on, I think it's Wikipedia, and you put in what is the modern definition of God willing, and you'll get this usually when you put this in. And it'll just say it's a phrase of God, and it's used to express the wish that one will be able to do as one intends, or that something will happen as planned. What's missing? God. It's God's will, but they took God out of that too. That's the modern definition. And that was a problem that James was addressing when he wrote what he did. That they're making all these plans, making all these commitments, but they're not putting God in the picture. And that's where they can easily go wrong. Regardless, Dio Volente, if God wills, it's still relevant and especially relevant for each one of us today. Proverbs 16, verse 9, you don't have to turn there, it's very brief. And this one also stirs up a lot of controversy too, because people don't understand what he really has said here. It simply goes, if a man's heart devises his ways, but the Lord directs his steps. Now, one of the controversies with this passage in the Bible is, well, it shows that God doesn't give us free will, that God is always in control. He's steering us. He's making us do what he wants us to do. And in a kind of way, it does say that. But what it doesn't say is that you're supposed to submit to God's will. And that's what it's really talking about. He gives you free will. He gives you the will to do anything you want. You got to live with the consequences of all those things that you do. But in this case, he's telling you that he's directing your steps. You put your faith and confidence in him. Now, I don't know if how many people here have ever built a building or had to add on to their house or did anything like that. But typically in the society we have today, you have to get a permit to do those things. Years ago, we had our roof replaced on our garage, and it was a small garage. It wasn't really all that big, probably more like a big shed. So we had a friend come over, and we spent 2 days putting the roof on this thing. And we had this giant pile of shingles sitting out in the driveway. And one day I get a knock on the door, and it's the garbage police. I didn't know we had garbage police, but apparently out of the town we lived in had garbage police. And he'd go around, driving around looking for violations. And he said, "You're in violation of one of our laws." And I go, "Well, what do you mean?" I just replaced this roof on my garage. He goes, "Well, you needed a permit for that." And I got very defensive. He's like, no, just hear me out. Goes, "You needed this permit so we could just tell you that you needed a dumpster to get rid of the trash. That's all you needed it for." She said, "Just take 10 bags and load them up and then put them out every week till it's gone and you're fine." And that was the end of it. So apparently I needed this permit to even do this thing on my roof. But if you're going to build a building, if you're going to do anything in your house, you need a permit. You need something typically, unless, well, I guess where Ken lives, there's not many permits anywhere. So keep that in mind if you want to retire somewhere. But you just can't go ahead and start building these things. I mean, I'm kind of one of those rebellious types. I kind of just do things and hope it works out. So it just, so you have to have plans drawn up. You have to put these things in motion. I used to sit in with the town board meetings when I worked for the town. And that's typically where they would approve these things. So the work would begin once you got approval. And those town board meetings, those are fun because they would get really heated and very ugly sometimes in there. But then later that day, they stamp the approval. Okay, let's go ahead and whatever you're going to do, we're going to build it. Christian lives are very similar to that. You know, we can make plans, but we still need authorization to go forward with. We still need a permit. We still need some approval of where we're taking those plans. Because it can go two ways. And one is that we can just do what we want to do, and I do that occasionally, I admit that, and believe that God is behind us in our efforts. Or second, we can submit our plans in prayer, meditation, and fasting and see what he wants us to do. That's the choice he wants us to make. That's where free will and his will meet, is that we're willing to give that thing to him, the plans, everything that we have for our life. We're willing to say, okay, God, what do you want from my life? What do you want to do? You know, it's interesting that way back when Israel was in captivity, and they were in captivity a lot, because guess what they did? They went against God. They did all these things against God. And even at times they even let other people tell them what to do against God. And they went into captivity quite a bit. And in Jeremiah's time, guess what? They're back in captivity again. And God had him write a letter to them. And he wanted to tell them something very important. You can be like me occasionally and do these plans and go somewhere with these things. But he wanted to tell them something very important about the fact that they're in captivity. And this is in Jeremiah 29, verse 11. He wanted to tell them something to remind them that they still have a responsibility. They still have a purpose. They still have a commitment to him that they need to follow. And this is also one of those rallying cries that people use when all hope is lost and everything seems out of God's control. Jeremiah 29 verse 11. For I know the plans I have for you. He's telling the people of Israel. I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you hope in the future. So he's having Jeremiah write this letter, telling him that all is not lost. You may have went astray, you may have followed false gods, but all is not lost. I still have a future for you. I still have you in my plans. So yes, and when we do those things, he still has us in his plans. So should you bring all your plans to God? Should you bring all of them, small, big, whatever? Should you do all those things? It's a good question. You have to ask yourself that continually. I mean, I typically don't pray about what I have for breakfast, but I'm thankful for it, and that's a commitment in itself. Typically we don't ask what kind of car to drive, although, when you're making a big purchase, it's a whole nother matter. We typically don't ask what colors we should wear. There's just things you don't have to bring to him. But sometimes he prompts you to do those things. He prompts you to ask him, hey, what about this? Hey, what about this? Because in that you gain certain wisdoms. But also you have to understand that the big plans is the ones he's concerned about. Where you're going to go, what you're going to do, what's your life going to consist of. And typically one of the problems is that we have a lot of focuses and a lot of things that we want to do, but God kind of wants to say, okay, well, that's a nice idea, but I have something else for you here. Let's talk about this. Why don't you pray about it to me? Why don't you bring these plans to me? You have to always give the bigger plans to God. You have to always say, okay, God, what do you expect of me? It's part of submission as Christians. And the faith is that you understand that whatever he wants you to do is where you're going to be blessed most. It doesn't mean it's going to be easy. It's going to be an easy road for you. I mean, we see that in the Bible too, that, Christianity as a self has been very hard on people. And he puts you through a lot of things because he tests you and he loves you and he wants to see where your commitments are and all these things. One of the worst places, though, even in the smallest places, we can find is that our plans are actually working against God's plans, that what we're doing does not include him. And Paul in the Bible, as you see in Acts, we won't go there today, but he's a prime example of that. He thought he was doing God a service by going through the known world and persecuting and killing Christians for the sake of the Jews, for the sake of going against Christ. And then on the road to Damascus, here comes Christ, and he says, why do you kick against the pricks? Why are you persecuting me, Saul? Why are you doing this? And at that moment, it was like a lightning hit him, and it's just like, I've been doing this all the wrong way all this time. And the rest of the story follows. Paul's life is very fascinating that way, because even after his conversion, after him going to Arabia for 3 years, he still had trouble with his ego, still had trouble with his past, and God kept having to bring him back in and kept trying to get him back on the road he's supposed to. But he continually took what he learned and resubmitted it back to God. Many people in this modern era, they start businesses, they go after things, and then they find out that God wasn't in them. They may have thought it because they had all the things involved with it that suggested that God wanted them to do these things, and then they come to find out that God wasn't there. It does happen, and it does happen a lot. And there's examples of people who have throughout time pursued one thing, and God said, okay, you did that. Let's go do this. I think we got something that I want you to do a little different today. One of the prime examples we have in modern culture is Billy Graham. He actually wanted to pursue a baseball career. Loved baseball. Went to all the games. Saw Babe Ruth. Did all that stuff. He wanted to be a professional baseball player. And over time, it didn't look like it was going to happen. And over time, he was working on his father's farm. And then over time, he discovered that he had a talent for ministry, started a small radio station, ended up being one of the biggest evangelists in the United States and actually the world through the 20th century. One of my favorite people, and you probably never heard of him, was James Hudson Taylor. And he's a very interesting character. He was born and raised in England. And by 17, he wanted to preach the gospel in China. And he learned Mandarin, he learned all the dialects, learned the culture. And at 17, he decided to go over to China and start preaching. Well, that was great. He did influence a lot of people. After 4 years, though, he became very sick. And he had to return to England. And him and his family lived in basic obscurity for 5 years in London's East End. If you don't know what London's East End is like, it's a pretty ugly side of town. And people prayed for him because there seemed to be no direction in his life at that point. He did all these wonderful things in China, and then it just seemed like it all stopped. And then in 1865, he wrote China's Spiritual Need and Claims. And with very limited money, he founded the China Inland Mission. And while he couldn't go there himself, a lot of people did. And every Christian in China, and it's a religion they can't suppress because it's so powerful over there. And they try, believe me, they try. All those Christians can tie their faith back to what he started back then, every one of them, because his zest, his zeal for these things exploded into this mission. So he didn't necessarily have to be there, but the power of what he started through God got him to influence lots of other people. Well, it's always said, and I'll put this out there, it's always said that, we don't live in this life for ourselves. We live in this life for other people. And everything you do affects someone else in some way or some fashion. Everything you do. So you may say to yourself, and I'm speaking primarily for the young people, God can use it at any age. You talk to some old people in ministry and you're like, you're still young if you're 45. 50, you're not even in middle age in ministry. 80, you might be reaching ministry. One of my favorite people, he just retired. He's 96. And he's still active though. He just doesn't preach because his voice doesn't hold up anymore. But he just doesn't want to give up. And I'm like, okay, I don't think you should. He's really good at what he does. But what if you say, I don't want anything to do with ministry? I talked about that earlier. I asked, Alex goes, well, do you think you're going to follow your father's footsteps now? And he just completed what the church had for training and all that. And he decided that it wasn't for him. And that's okay. What if you just want a job or career and you want to pay the bills and, you may feel that interest takes you away from God. And, you have to understand that is acceptable too. Not many people are called to ministry. Not many people are called to the direct ministry that you see like being up here or this doing people. It's not something that's typically God wants everybody to do. And there's a good reason for that. Oftentimes, careers can seem away from these things. And from God, you have to look closely at what he's doing. He's still in your life. And if you're submitting to him, he's still there. He's still guiding you to what you want to do. We live a life that honors God, and everything we do outside of that, we're still honoring him. And our pursuits are still his. And we have to understand that they go hand in hand. One thing that people, don't fully understand in that is when God puts you on a path, and it may not be ministry. He may want you to work here. He may want you to, I don't see anyone here doing this. You may find yourself in prison sometime. It's interesting that I was reading Fox's Book of Martyrs this week, and if you want some sobering stuff, read that. You realize how privileged we are in this country. And one of the most influential people that they talk about them, but he spent 5 years in a Soviet prison. And he says the walls were always covered with ice, never got above 41 degrees there. You were always wet. And, when you slept, the heat from the bodies in that room generating heat would cause the ice to melt. And by morning, it would refreeze. And so you didn't wake up fast, because typically you're frozen to the floor and it'd rip your hair out. And so he endured this for 5 years. And the Christians in the prison would get together, find a place in the snow where they could get together and encourage each other. And there was a few Christians that would do that every day. And for some reason, God wanted him there. And that what he did there ended up spilling over to other people, building up their faith in the most horrible places. And to this day, his example is in that book of what he had done and the things that have come from that throughout time. It was mentioned, I mentioned that to a few people, that the Soviets persecuted Christians, and that was from the October Revolution on, that they were outside of it. They did it to Jews, they did it to any outstanding religion. But in the 1960s, they had a change of heart because they discovered that the Christians actually were more loyal and they worked harder. And so they backed off on the persecution, but it never ended. It never truly ended. In fact, to this day, even under the current establishment over there, it still continues in subtle ways. You just don't see it reported because who cares about Christians, right? still goes on. The people still hold the faith. Whatever God inspires you to do, even if it's a stay-at-home parent, it becomes your ministry wherever you are, whatever you're doing, how old you are. It doesn't matter. Whatever you're doing, that's your ministry. You may not be up here. You may not be doing what ministers do, but God's putting you in a place where you minister. It could be to your family, it could be to your friend, it could be to your neighbors, it could be to anybody around you. You don't know who's influenced by these things. One thing that I'd say is a positive thing about social media, there's not many of them, but social media gives you an opportunity to minister because they see what kind of examples that you live in the way that you live on social media. You're not argumentative. You're not confrontational. You don't spew out disgusting things on there like others do. That becomes your ministry too. Everything you do, if you submit it to God, becomes your ministry, no matter how old or how young you are. So I mentioned Ecclesiastes. And it's also very full of wisdom in this thing. We won't get to it all today. I'm like, yes. But no, Ecclesiastes 9 and verse 7. Ecclesiastes 9 and verse 7. Solomon always had this thing, a very sobering look at life and death. And one thing he used to indicate a lot was how, the living still have hope. They still have a future. And it all ends when you die. When you take this last breath, we have the hope of the kingdom. We have the hope of being with Christ when we die. That's a whole nother life. He's judging us on what we do in this life. And for some, as we see in the Bible, that this is their only life because of the way they lived it and the way they lived their time here. Ecclesiastes 9 verse 7, go eat your food with gladness and drink your wine with a joyful heart. For God has already approved of what you do. Always be clothed in white and always anoint your head, which means take care of yourself. Make sure you take care of everything that you do. Enjoy life with your wife, whom you love, and all the days of this meaningless life that God has given you under the sun. And if you read Ecclesiastes, he said everything is meaningless. All life is meaningless. In a way it is if you live it outside of God. All your hand finds to do it with all your might. For in the realm of the dead where you are going, there is neither work, nor planning, nor knowledge, or wisdom. So he's encouraging you to do everything with all your might. Everything you do has to carry the full weight of what you're capable of. Everything involved. So in closing, I know everybody likes to hear that.
I heard that, yeah.
Yeah. Yes. God willing is not just an empty phrase. It's not two simple letters on a page. It carries the weight of your entire destiny, is what God has planned for you. Now understand that this destiny was secured for you by Christ's submission and what he did for his Father. You don't need to turn there, but Luke 22 and verse 42. As we know, Jesus was praying in the garden, and he prayed the most intently he's ever prayed, that it was ever recorded. So much that drops of blood came out of him. He prayed so hard. I don't think there's a person I know of that ever did that. I've seen people pray very intently, but not that intently. He was about to suffer for our sake. He was about to suffer for all of humanity, to redeem them to God, to die for our sins. And all of a sudden, what he had done became locked in stone, and it was going to go forward. And he said, Father, if thou be willing, remove this cup from me. He still wanted it gone because he knew what he was facing. He knew what he had to go through. He knew what was about to happen. All our sins were going to be dumped on him, and he was going to suffer for every one of them, as if he committed them, even though he was sinless. But he said, nevertheless, my will, but thine be done. He submitted to the Father. He said, I'm willing to do this for them, and I'm willing to follow your will. The most powerful act any person had ever done, any being has ever done, it benefited so many people, all people, even people that were before, even people that weren't even born, all these things because of his submission to his Father to follow through and save us from eternal death. So we know that, all these things show us the way to go and the way to live life and how all these things need to honor God. it's a real, privilege to be here in this time for you, Kate. It really is. I'd like you to turn in closing to Colossians 3 in verse 23. And Colossians, I was reading this morning, and I was like, boy, this is full of all kinds of good stuff. You may have read it. I've probably read it about 5 times in my life, and through thoroughly. And I was like, boy, this is so full of good stuff. Even some interesting things happening right now. It's just like, wow, this actually addresses that too. And it's like, what a great thing. But he shows the commitment end of where you're supposed to be. In Colossians 3:23, whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, as if you're working for the Lord, not human masters. What he's saying is that you're not working for those people that employ you. You're not working for your customers. You're not working for whoever's above you. You're not working for Donald Trump. You're not working for Vladimir Putin. You're not working for any of these people. You're working for God. You're working for Jesus Christ. He expects a little more out of you than what they would expect from you. He expects you to follow through no matter what they say to you. You're working for, it's like the mob. You're working for me now. So, since you know that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward, it is the Lord Christ you are serving. Keep that in mind, whatever you do, whether it's ministry, whether you're staying at home, whether you're sweeping the streets, whether you're serving in a hospital, whether you go to a school to teach children, which is a very noble thing. All these things are working for him, not anybody else. And that's what you're supposed to do. One of my favorite movies, and I don't recommend it for a lot of people because there's a lot of swearing in there. It actually goes back to the Russian thing. Is The Death of Stalin, and they have a Christian woman in there. And throughout this thing, she's just defiant to the end. She serves God, and she's like, yeah, kill me. I don't care. You killed my parents. I don't care. When she found out she was going to play, she's a musician, she was going to play for Stalin, she just dropped her instrument and walked out. He goes, I'm not doing it. And it could have easily got her the death penalty. But throughout the movie, she kept reappearing and saying, yep, it's still here. So remember who you're serving. We're grateful that we can be a part of this. We're very grateful that we can be here for your special day. And we hope that if possible, if God willing, we'll be there for the future parts. We don't know what he's going to do with you. We know that he's going to do something wonderful for you. We know that, we're going to see good things out of you. I can say it's a given. One of the things that tells me that is, if you indulge me, hold up your Bible. Okay, take a look at this. That's probably one of many of the most impressive things about you. And that just shows me how committed you are to this, and that's very inspiring. I'm an archivist, so I have to take like this Bible. I'd be like, worried about preserving it. I keep it pristine. I don't write anything in my Bible because it's just like I want to keep it nice. I don't want to ruin it. But that's the power of God right there. Just sticky notes is like thicker to twice as thick as it used to be. That's your commitment to God. So you're going to go places. You have to understand too that wherever you're going to go, we hope it's still with us, but we're willing to commit your future to God too. That one way or another, we're going to be cheering you on from wherever we are, no matter what. We'll never forget the time that we had for you. That's why I take pictures. It's like, we got to remember these times. And whether it's you're here with us or you're somewhere else, you have this cheering section that you can always take with you in your mind, remembering who we were and remembering those things. You may not know exactly where you're going, like that song said, there's interesting people at 40 that, they didn't know what they were doing either, but trust that it's all in God's hands. It's all in Christ's hands too. And you're loved by all of us, and that is definitely the truth. So, God willing, will be a part of your future to come.